who have known me for a long time, and those who are not here who have known me for even longer, will know that the idea of eradicating poverty is something that's been on my heart basically from when I got saved in 1988. And when I first got saved and I started reading the Bible seriously, it very quickly became apparent to me that God has an issue with poverty. And that when Jesus said that you will always have the poor with you, that was not an instruction, and it was not an excuse for us to let poverty just continue as it is. And so for my whole life, this has been what I've been passionate about, what I've been working on. I've been in the non-profit sector, I've been in the for-profit sector. And really in the last 2 years, God has given me an opportunity to step away from work for a while and to begin to really engage with this amazing community and some people that are connected to this community and formulate what I believe can potentially be quite a powerful model. So I want to share just quickly 4 things that I believe, an area of focus that I believe can be really powerful, and then a model which has ingredients that separately maybe are not quite having the impact that they could, but if we bring them together, I believe we have one of the most powerful ways and one of the most powerful instruments that God can use to eradicate poverty and disciple nations. So 4 things that I believe. The first thing that I believe is that we are in a season where God is restoring something to the church that has been stolen. And what has been stolen is that through the prosperity movement, the idea of wealth and Christianity got a bad name. And yet I believe that God is busy restoring the blessing of godly diligence and the integration of godly diligence with divine provision as something that is a core part of how He has designed for us as human beings to function and flourish. So that's one of the first things that I believe. Secondly, I believe that in this room today, we have all the resources and networks, so directly in this room or connected in this room, to significantly impact and eradicate most of poverty as we see it in the world today. And then thirdly, I believe that small businesses are one of the most powerful potential tools that can be used in God's hand for eradicating poverty and for discipling nations. So small business, if I think about small business and I talk about small business, what do I mean? So one of the things I've noticed is the moment I use the word small business, then people interchangeably use it with startup. And I actually think that that has caused us to overlook a really, really big part of our economy. And so when I use the word small business today, I want to give it a very specific definition. And with that, I'm not saying that startups are not small businesses, but otherwise I'm going to keep on having to repeat like 10 words to talk about this one word. So today when I talk about small businesses, I'm referring to businesses that have been running for at least 5 years, and that have at least 5 employees, and that are run by a founder who has an ambition to grow. So that part of the market, founders who want to grow their businesses, they've been running for at least 5 years, and they've got at least 5 employees, I believe have incredible potential in terms of growth. And there's really a few reasons why I think that is such a powerful sector to focus on. The first reason is they've got a proven business model. So yes, maybe in the States you could have been running for 5 years on venture capital and you can raise round after round after round. But the chances that you've still got a business in South Africa, if you haven't been profitable after 5 years, very, very slim. So most probably you've proven your business model. You've got customers that are coming back to you, buying your product. So you've proven that. If you've got at least 5 employees, you have proven that you're not just a subsistence solopreneur. You are somebody that's actually taking care of some other families. You're paying a payroll every month. You've most probably dipped into your mortgage a few times to make payroll. And And you've proven that you can get enough customers for your business to actually support that business and that structure. In the third place, there is, in South Africa alone, and it's actually quite difficult to find these stats, but from the research that I've been able to see and find, there's somewhere between 70,000 and 250,000 businesses that fall in this category. So it's quite a scalable part of the market to address. And if you go through the rest of Africa, it's hundreds of thousands of businesses that fall in this category. In the fourth place, small businesses are still intimate enough that the entrepreneurs can really be a powerful vehicle in God's hands in terms of impacting the people that are working for them. You know, a pastor stands on the stage once a week, and people come and listen to him, and he puts his best image forward while he's on the stage. But the entrepreneur shows up at work every day. He spends 8 hours a day with these people, and they see him when the business is doing well. They see him when the business is doing badly. They see him when he's having fights with his wife at home. They see him when his children are doing well and when his children are doing badly. And as an entrepreneur, that person really has a unique ability to speak into the lives of the people that they're working with. So in terms of the power that an entrepreneur has as a tool in God's hand to disciple the people that work for them, and a tool in God's hand through that to disciple nations, when you start scaling that up, is really, really significant. So with all of that as background, the question then is, well, you know, if small businesses could grow, like, why aren't they just growing? And some of them are growing. And I think what I've found, so I've been working with small business entrepreneurs now for the last 7-8 years, and I've really identified that I think there's sort of a wicked triangle that many small business entrepreneurs are trapped into. And that wicked triangle is about time, money, and capability. And those lock into each other. So most small business entrepreneurs are working 8-12 hours a day, often 6-7 days a week, and they really don't have time to figure out how to grow their business. And most of them don't come out of the corporate world where they've learned how to formulate strategy and growth strategy and all those things. And they don't have the time to figure out how to do those things. And very often they run from month to month in terms of financials. So they don't have the money to actually pay for a consultant to come and help them formulate a growth strategy or free up some of their time by buying in fractional talent to enable them to drive the growth. So there's this little triangle happening there. And if we look at the interventions that are available to small business entrepreneurs, then what you'll find is that the typical interventions that are available for larger businesses is very difficult for them to access. And there's specific reasons for that. So if you, for example, if you were saying, okay, well, let's give them some input in terms of content. And I think there's 3 ingredients that we typically look at when we say, you know, what is it that a business needs to grow? It needs content, it needs community, and it needs capital. And actually, you know, when we look at the book of Acts, in Acts 2, it says that they devoted themselves to the apostles' teachings and to prayer. They came together, and then those who had a lot sold some of their stuff and gave it to the people. And it's like a model of content, community, and capital in how it was deployed. And so as I started putting all of these pieces together, I began to realize that those 3 ingredients are available, but they're often not available to the small business entrepreneur, and especially not in an integrated way. So if we think of content is available everywhere. You can find any content you want, but there's actually an overload of content right now. If we look at community, there are really good communities that people can belong to. C12 was mentioned earlier, awesome community. There's Convene, there's Ziwani that's got the council now. There are other similar communities. But these communities are not specifically focused on helping you grow your small business. So you'll have peers who are maybe execs in large businesses, and you'll have maybe somebody else who's in a startup, and there'll be somebody maybe like you are. And then there's capital. Now, why don't we really find a lot of capital in this space? I think in this room, I don't have to explain why it's really difficult to effectively and efficiently deploy capital into small businesses. If your goal with deploying capital is to use the capital to make more money, then it's highly unlikely that you're going to come to the conclusion that the best place to do that is to write a lot of small checks and invest those into small businesses. So it's just not a very lucrative place to invest in. It's very difficult to do that efficiently. However, and this is where I think the key lies, if you could build a model where you carefully and very deliberately architect these three things together, then I think you can build something that is economically sustainable and that actually enables you to scale this up and have a significant impact on eradicating poverty. So what do I mean by that? If you were to take content and you say, okay, let's create focused, curated content that is very specific, very specifically focused at taking businesses of at least 5, 10 people and growing them to about 50, 60, 70 people. So a very specific niche growth journey. All the content is about what do you need to know to overcome the obstacles that you as an entrepreneur are facing in this journey in Africa as a Christian entrepreneur who also wants to be redemptive in what you do. But then apart from just giving you that content, we say, well, let's put you in a community that is very, very specifically focused. A community of peers, a community of practice, of people that are on that same journey as what you are. And in that community, we bring the content because the way that you consume content is massively impacted by the community in which you consume that content. So now we put you in a community where you are reading, learning, hearing about how to grow your business. You're grappling with that together in a small group of peers that meet once or twice a month, where you're holding each other accountable, where you're sharing each other's struggles with, well, the content says we have to do this. I've tried to do it, and man, it's difficult. And you also ensure that that community is led by professionally well-trained facilitators who are trained specifically in how to grow a business through that specific period. Now you've got a community of accountability and practice, good content. Now when you bring capital into a community like that, you've got a selection, you've got a community, so it means you've got a kind of captive market where you can say, okay, which of these businesses very specifically would be able to use finance and capital to unlock growth. Now, one of the problems with deploying capital into small businesses is the need for that capital to pay for the consulting and the coaching that you need in order for the business to grow. But if you've already got a financially sustainable model in terms of your content and your community, you can take that burden off the capital. So the capital can be there to just do what capital is supposed to do, which is to unlock specific growth opportunities, because the community and the content is already driving the growth, and the community is already helping you mitigate the risk because you've already got accountability, and that enables the capital to just do what the capital is supposed to do. So that's the idea, that if we could build a model where we have content, community, and capital carefully architected and deliberately put together to drive small business growth, I believe that you can build a scalable model where you can invest in hundreds and then thousands and tens of thousands of businesses. You can create millions of jobs. If you bring a strong redemptive entrepreneurial part to this, it can be a massive tool in God's hands in terms of discipling nations and eradicating poverty at a mental, emotional, psychological, spiritual, and material level. So that is the idea, that's the model, and that's what we're going to discuss now. So, without further ado, let me find my questions here. So Pete, we're starting with you, and we obviously had a bit of a discussion beforehand, so if it sounds like this is kind of set up, it is. Pete, I remember you mentioning some of the specific challenges that led to you as an entrepreneur starting the council. Can you quickly just tell us what the council is and what is it that made you think, well, let me start this as an entrepreneur?
All right, cool. So I think quickly the council, it's based on an EO, YPO model. I suppose, more closely aligned to a C12 or convene. So it's business forums of 8 entrepreneurs that come together monthly as a safe kind of place to share, steward, get challenged, get encouraged, and then kind of get sent back into the workforce. So what sparked it, I think, is 2 things. So for the last 13 years, I've been part of a EO breakaway group. And it's been the same men that we have met, the same entrepreneurs for 13 years. I love them dearly, but every time I would drive home from Cape Town, I would always go, Lord, these guys aren't Christian. What have they shared that is godly wisdom, and what is just worldly wisdom? And so often that worldly wisdom is so close that it's easy to miss it. And I realized surely there's a space that I can get godly wisdom. And more than that, every now and again, I just wanted to lean across the table, hug the oak, and say, listen, I can't help you, but I know the Holy Spirit can. So I also wanted to see a space where the Holy Spirit could move. So that was the one thing. And then the second kind of point that sparked it was, as an entrepreneur, there's not many safe spaces. Like, to be honest, I'm an entrepreneur. You're all investors. I'm going to put my best foot forward. You know, I'm going to want you to like me, but I'm not going to tell you if I'm battling with my kids or if I'm going through a hard time, because I'm putting my best foot forward. And there are very few places that you're not with a colleague, that you're not with a possible investor or a client, that you can actually go, this is me. So there needed to be a space that we could be raw, that we can be real, we can be vulnerable. And to me, it's like that picture, you're out fighting the battle, or you climb in a mountain, you go back to the castle, you sit around the fire, and you get restored and encouraged. You have people that go, hey, how are you stewarding your family? You can have business success, but if you are falling apart at home, that's not fruit that's going to last. So I think between those 2 things, this idea of the council, which is kind of run and supported by Zawani, was sparked.
Awesome, thank you. Jonathan, you've had quite a broad experience, and over the years you've worked in leadership development, you've worked with facilitation, but something you mentioned the other day really stuck with me, and that was how the way that you work with businesses in Third Way Capital is very relational. But you also specifically mentioned that you use quite specific models in helping entrepreneurs in those businesses understand certain of the challenges and the economic environments in which they operate. So maybe based on that and maybe some other experiences, can you share with us sort of how you see the interplay between knowledge and relationship and the impartation of that knowledge in a relational environment, specifically in the challenges that people are facing?
Yeah. Can I back up a little bit and go into the earlier parts of my career? So when I lived in South Africa in my previous life, I ran a leadership development program out of African Enterprise, working with Christian leaders in business and government and the not-for-profit sector. And in that program was basically designed around the premise that character precedes competence, or character is the necessary foundation on which competence builds. If you're trying to teach somebody effective team development skills, those arise well out of somebody who has already cultivated humility through the work of God in them. They are already more naturally other-centered. And the trouble when you are an investor is you don't have time for that journey. And so to Tandega's point earlier, you need that founder archetype, where you're looking for the leaders who have that humility, that posture of humility. I don't know if any of you were at Forge yesterday and saw Renato Martesini, who's one of the co-founders of Ditto, but he's exemplary in that sense. Like, he has such a posture of openness and a hunger to learn, but he does have his own mind, and he'll argue his point if he thinks that we as the investor maybe aren't understanding something correctly, but he's so keen to learn. And so that's a foundation that you have to look for at the front end. But once you're in, then there's a competence piece. And there's time for that. Because, I mean, all of us, even those of us who are investors, we're learning as we go also. And so what we've done in Third Way Capital is to firstly find the founders that we can have that relationship with, that, as Renato said yesterday, we are actually in this together as partners. And we bring our capital, but we also bring this advisory role. And so one of the things that many business owners lack is they might have good strategic instincts, but is knowing how to break out or to follow a structured process to build those instincts into an effective strategy. And particularly given the context that we live in, although I would say this applies anywhere, in any industry, in any regional environment, is to understand that what they're doing is they're trying to catalyze systemic change. Even if they don't have an impact motive, but we do look for that. And so helping them build a strategy that is based on systems change principles, and that is, again, most of us, if we think about systems change per Rory's profound talk this morning, it's overwhelming. We want to climb Everest, and it's daunting. And so the systems change strategy that we're helping them to build is to build Basecamp, but build Basecamp with Everest in mind. And a Basecamp is a plannable future. It's 3 years out. It's not crazy stuff at 50 years out. And so we're just equipping them with basic tools that set them up for being able to repeat that exercise every 3 or 4 years or whatever it may be. And then we help them turn that into a 1-year execution plan, which is built on the OKR methodology, which is just such a simple but powerful method for execution. So, but all of that work is very, very difficult to do if there aren't some of those fundamental character pieces, those fundamental leadership pieces already ready.
Very good. Thank you. We're going to change a little bit of gears now, and we're quickly going to get a little bit more technical around financial instruments, and then we're going to swing it back. So, Greg, 2 questions. The first one, can you talk a little bit about, you've had quite some experience in investing in the small business space, and firstly, just the various financial instruments that you found was needed as you invested in the space that's useful for investors, and kind of what are some of the criteria you would consider in which financial instruments to use in which environments?
Sure, thanks, Ashton. What I won't try and do is give an overview of every instrument out there, at risk of boring myself, as well as everyone else. What I will maybe start off with is, just from a principle perspective, is I think what we try and do is to start with, what is the right instrument that serves that business and the mission, as opposed to the other way around. And I think starting from that principle, you're not, saying I'm a debt financier and I'm, only looking for cash flow, or I'm an equity financier and I'm looking for an IPO. We operate with a partnership model where we're able to, select and customize a particular instrument to that, unique scenario. I think maybe just taking a step back and thinking about the types of businesses that you're referring to that are growing from 5 to 50. That might sound easy, but a 10x growth in your employee count, maybe as a proxy for a 10x growth in your revenue count, maybe your product set, perhaps your geographies, is exceptionally complex. And I think the amount of complexity that can add to your operational, functions is not linear, and often your revenue doesn't grow in a linear way. So I think what we've seen, and anyone that's invested in a small business, is that goes in fits and troughs, and because of the unpredictability of that revenue growth and often earnings growth, I think what that implies within that particular context is an instrument that's perhaps a bit more flexible, and an instrument that's perhaps a bit more patient. From an entrepreneur's perspective, that's what you're looking for, is ultimate patience and flexibility, and maybe not an interest payment at the end of the month. I think from an investor's perspective, what you're also looking for is reward, be it from an impact perspective or a financial perspective, if there's success, I guess, in the end game. And I think the combination of that is really where the art lies. So, perhaps within that context, what that really speaks to is probably an instrument set that's maybe equity profile. And I say equity profile and not equity because, as you noted, I think a lot of people thinking about the early stage space just think venture capital. And, in the US, that might be multiple different equity rounds, and there's very deep capital markets, and there's an understanding around going from pre-seed to seed to Series A to B and growth and IPO, and it's all mapped out. I think in an environment like South Africa or an emerging market, it's not as linear. And although you need the patience and flexibility, some of the tools that work in the private equity space or the listed market or even in the US and Silicon Valley don't work here. And I think we have to be creative around designing instruments that meet the need of the business, but perhaps don't kind of tick all the boxes just from a Western perspective. So I think some of those instruments, which I won't give all the technical details on, find me over lunch if you want to have a conversation, things like convertible instruments. So be it a safe note or be it a convertible pref or a convertible debt instrument that enables you to anchor a valuation today to what that business is going to do in the future. So it incentivizes outperformance in an uncertain future. Things like a preference share instrument with perhaps a floating coupon rate, where you can anchor that coupon rate to either impact outcomes and or financial outcomes and approximate a cost of capital over time. Things like revenue-based financing or revenue-based loans. I know the Linear team are here today, so chat to them about that, where you're able to scale the repayments as revenue actually picks up, and the business can more afford that, but you cap the total return to a multiple of cost or something similar so that it doesn't become exorbitant over time. Things like outcomes-based funding mechanisms where you might have an outcomes payment for certain impact targets, or you might have a variable interest rate or variable ratchet on your equity participation based on outcomes. And I think that's the type of space that, where you've got high growth, you've got unpredictability, you've got early stage entrepreneurs, but you've got a mission, is where we should be looking towards.
Thank you. And following up from that, I know that at Edge Growth specifically, you had actually begun to make sort of, as we were discussing, you mentioned that as the need became clear, you did try to be that flexible and say, well, let's make the instruments available that are needed. Tell us a little bit about the challenges that comes with that flexibility.
Absolutely. I think we had such a unique context in that most of us didn't come from traditional finance institutions. We hadn't come from a bank or a private equity fund or the listed space or anything in between. I came from a process engineering background, and some of my co-founders came from consulting backgrounds. And I think what we were looking to do is pretty much what I said, is we saw the mandate was essentially capital preservation, which is unusual. It was impact oriented, where we were looking to invest capital into missing middle businesses within the supply chains of corporates, missing middle black-owned businesses. So there was an inclusion angle as well. And it was instrument agnostic. So, our funders wisely or unwisely said, structure what you like to meet this mandate and drive inclusion into a space that is by definition difficult to do because the banks and the VCs and the private equity guys have not done so. So I think what that underpins is the need for innovation. And we're speaking about 10, 13 years ago, before the linears were around and before you had a lot of experience in the convertible structures and maybe some of the more innovative things that I've mentioned. And we just had to start from first principles of what does this business need? What's the way that we can tailor it? And in many cases, we were introducing debt at the same time as equity, at the same time as a convertible instrument, and we just didn't know what we didn't know. I think we learned over the course of 10 to 12 years what worked and what didn't work, and we had some scars to show for those that didn't work. But I think what that taught us is that actually it takes a combination of these instruments. Often as the business scales and as cash flow emerges, you might get into the more traditional space. But you need to be creative in bringing together a basket within that business, and you need to be nimble and be able to flex when an instrument's not working. Having said that, so that was great for us from a deal-making perspective, and we did these deals, and it was like a financial engineering boot camp. For our ops and finance and compliance team, it was a disaster. You write a whole bunch of different instruments, and you're doing your annual audit, and you need to, value the fund, and you need to give investor statements, and you need to manage these businesses. We ended up with, I think, about 65 investments across the instrument space, across the industry space. And that breeds complexity. Now you've got a bigger team to manage that. You've got a lot of expertise that need to be brought to bear in order to do diligence on an investment side, and I guess your fiduciary duty, and that's expensive. So I think my reflection on that is that I wouldn't put my hand up to do all of that myself again. And I don't think that that's designed to be done necessarily maybe through one instrument and one team. But I think one of the things that was powerful for me that was mentioned on one of the earlier panels was the principle of partnership. And through Lighthouse, our name is Lighthouse Venture Partners. And I think our model is to structure a venture partner relationship across the capital spectrum, with fund managers, with family offices, with private investors, with corporates, and design a partnership at the same time as designing an instrument structure. And we got the flexibility to bring in specialists where needed, to bring in someone that maybe we don't have a commercial agreement with, but that understands that space well, and I guess leverage the power of this community and the broader ecosystem.
Awesome, thank you. Yeah, and again, the community part and the connection between the community and the capital, I think, becomes so important in terms of building those relationships. Then taking the community and coming back a little bit again to something about content. So Jonathan, you've had quite a bit of experience with significant influence through creating content, been involved in various organizations that do that. And maybe a slight twist on the topic, and linking that maybe also back to some of the capital conversation. I know that you've been trying to raise some funding off what at least I thought was a pretty good narrative. And I know you guys have been having some challenges with that. And in terms of saying, like the narrative for example, impact and patient capital is out there, but somehow when you try to raise the capital around it, seems it's maybe the narrative and the reality is not necessarily as well connected. What do you think is the role of content creation in trying to move sort of this society that we are in towards more impact and better impact, and for example, kind of maybe what could be seen as a bit of a controversial investment idea that we're pitching here?
Well, there's a lot in that. And I'll come to the specifics around the content in a moment, but of course, for content to be meaningful, it has to start to get traction and has to multiply. And so if you embark on an initiative to change the narrative and change the paradigms, I think that's a combination of hard work and trusting that God allows it to multiply, because you are working on a steep slope to change minds. And I'll get into some specifics in that, when we start at Third Way Capital, and I would say this would be the case in pretty much any market, whether it's emerging market or a developed market, that obviously there's a place for VC and private equity and so on, growth equity, but the holding company model, the permanent capital vehicle, is a very, very powerful one. It's stable. It allows for substantive long-term businesses to grow and create sustained long-term yields, and economically it's very healthy. But raising for that is extremely difficult. And I can't count the number of conversations with institutional investors who would say, totally agree with you, but we can't do that. The governance structures won't allow it, especially the DFIs, but others as well. And so then, get to the content, there's an immediate response that's required by us, because if trying to change the narrative is the pathway to succeeding in running or raising into our investment capital vehicle, we'll be waiting about another 10 or 15 years to succeed in doing so. So we've had to rethink and restructure and pivot so that we can meet what LPs want in terms of some of their basic criteria, but still try and hold as close to possible to this more patient approach. I actually don't like patient is a good word actually, but patient sounds like you're kind of sitting back in your chair a bit, and maybe you have a snooze once in a while you watch the capital at work, and so we need another word because it's not that kind of capital. But anyway, so to the content piece, having worked in the corporate sector for many years as a management consultant, I just think there's some fundamental flaws in understanding that the only reason we think that there's a dichotomy between value creation and impact, as if they're two different things, or a profit-making business and impact, is because we don't have, and we will never have, the accounting mechanisms that allow us to account for all the externalities that come with what our business does, and that there's actually any business that drives high profits, but actually at the expense of many other things, we have no way of accounting for that. So, I think then you have to switch it around and say you have to have a principles-based approach to value creation, and so there's a way to write that narrative. There's a way to unpack the absolute nonsense that drives, I would say that actually the incoherent thinking that drives the typical profit maximization narrative. But that is a long-term process, and as Christians, you're actually up against principalities and powers. So we're trying to work on that. And by the way, I've had these conversations when I worked in the corporate sector, and I would have senior corporates say to me, we know that's true, and we want to go there, but we have no idea how, because we still are bound to our quarterly reporting. So the other thing that then is to also find a way to bring the data points together that demonstrate the power of the patient capital model and demonstrate the economic and financial fruitfulness of it. And I'm finding that looking at the traditional fund structures is not the place to do that. Even the fund structures that might be approximating, because they haven't been well run. Sorry, they haven't been well run. So that their performance is not something to necessarily look at. But there are hidden places. There are operators on this continent, holding companies that are quietly getting on with things. Just their family businesses that just grew and grew and grew, and they know how Africa works. And these folks are seeing 25x returns if they're willing to wait for 15 years. So it's finding those data points and crafting the narrative around what's actually happening, as well as unpacking the illogic that drives these other models and replacing it with a better logic, which I think we can do as Christians. So all that to say, it's a work in progress, and we don't have the expectation that changing the narrative will lead us to raise the fund that we're currently trying to raise.
All right. Yeah, I think what really comes out when you sort of ask these questions is that often what happens is, even though we can see what's needed, there's real reasons why it's difficult to get there. But I think that's one of the things that we as Christians are really good at, is walking hard roads and having a long-term view and saying, well, if this is what's needed, go make disciples of all nations. That's what Jesus told us to do. Well, we're still busy doing that. Because that's what we're good at as Christians, is to take really, really difficult problems and just keep going at them until eventually something happens and something moves. And we've seen Jonathan, you guys did that Big Change podcast about just the changes that have happened because of what Christians have done over the years. And so if we could sort of like put this is really hard, on hold for a moment. And Pete, if you could imagine a world in which you as an entrepreneur have access to really, really good content. That's exactly what you need at the right time around to grow your business. There's a community that you can be part of that's a good community of practice that gives you the coaching that you need. And as and when there's clear growth opportunities, but that need capital, it's relatively easy for you to access that capital in whatever format that capital would be most appropriate. Can you talk a little bit as an entrepreneur about the challenges that you faced and how, if that had existed, You think that would make life easier for entrepreneurs?
It would be glorious. But I think the challenge with what you've said is actually the entrepreneur, to be honest. So maybe I'm going to address this one to all the investors in the house. To give an analogy, my church once a year does a marriage evening. And my wife always drags me along. And I always love it. I come away and I'm like, my marriage goes deeper and I love it. And I think as entrepreneurs, we're bad because there is content. There is community out there. There's capital. We all chase the capital. You know, we're very good at phoning all of you and asking for your money. We're not always that good at chasing the content, the material, and the community. And I think we need to be dragged there every now and again. So I would nearly say to the investors here, one of the few times I do things is when my investors say to me, listen, I need you to do this and this. I'm so in the trenches kind of building a business. It's very seldom that I lift my head up and do actually what's important. And my wife will, every now and again get me to do the right things. But I'm chasing business. I'm then home on the weekend with family, with kids. I'm part of my church. There's not a lot of time for me to go, let me build community. Let me go read up and find out about this content. But if my investor says, listen, this is what I need you to do, go do it, I will do it because the investor's also looking at it from a macro point of view. So I think my encouragement for the investors would be like, when you're investing in that business, is there a little line item there going C12 or council or one of these? Are they building community? Are they going to days like this? Are you looking at them going, hey, are you going to the Trigger event? Have you applied to be part of Trigger, etc.? So, I think it's there, and I think the problem is the entrepreneur, and I think the investors can play a big part in that by kind of kicking your entrepreneurs' butts to actually go, yes, you're chasing dollars, you're doing this, but actually, do you have the right content? You know, are you joining the council? Are you doing those things? So sorry, it's a bit of a left field answer.
No, I think that's a great answer, and that's why we have panels.